Between November of 1945 and October of 1950, 5 people disappeared from a 1-mile stretch of trail on Glastenbury Mountain in southwestern Vermont. The first was 74 years old. The last was 53. Between them were an 18-year-old college student, a 68-year-old veteran, and an 8-year-old boy. 5 people. 1 mile of trail. 5 years. No official investigation ever formally connected the cases. The Vermont State Police investigated each disappearance separately. Each file remained separate. The geographic pattern was not widely recognized until a writer documented it decades later. 4 of the 5 were never found. The only person who was recovered could not be assigned a definitive cause of death. That is where this investigation begins. Glastenbury Mountain rises in the southwestern corner of Vermont within what is now the Green Mountain National Forest. By the early 20th century, the surrounding area had become almost completely uninhabited. The town of Glastenbury was incorporated in 1834. At its peak, only a few hundred people lived there. Most worked in logging or charcoal production. By 1900, those industries had collapsed. The residents gradually left. In 1937, Glastenbury was officially disincorporated. The town disappeared. The forest returned. Today it remains one of the least visited areas in Vermont. The terrain is rugged. The long trail crosses the mountain at an elevation of roughly 3,700 feet. Dense hardwood and conifer forests cover the slopes below the ridgeline. The trails are maintained. They are not heavily traveled. It is the kind of place where an accident could occur without immediate witnesses. Long before the logging camps and abandoned towns, the Abenaki people had their own relationship with this mountain. We want to be careful about how we present that history. The Abenaki are a living people with living traditions. We are not using those traditions as atmosphere for a mystery story. We are acknowledging that documented historical accounts and recorded oral traditions describe Glastenbury Mountain as a place people deliberately avoided. The specific reasons differ across historical sources. We are not going to speculate about them, nor are we going to assign beliefs the historical record does not clearly support. What matters is something much simpler. Long before the disappearances of the 1940s, the mountain already carried a reputation. The people who knew the region best had treated it differently for generations. That reputation did not prevent 5 people from disappearing there between 1945 and 1950. Perhaps it explains why some local people were less surprised than outsiders. The first disappearance occurred on November 12, 1945. Middie Rivers was 74 years old. He had spent much of his life working in the Vermont wilderness. He was an experienced hunting guide who knew Glastenbury Mountain exceptionally well. On that November morning, he was leading 4 hunters through familiar country. Walking ahead of the group was completely routine. Guides often scout the trail or check conditions before the rest of the party arrives. The hunters fell slightly behind. When they reached the place where Rivers had been walking, he was gone. He was never found. His rifle was later discovered leaning against a tree near a stream. Not dropped, not broken. Leaning upright, as though someone had placed it there carefully. Investigators searched extensively. They found no additional evidence. The case was eventually closed without an explanation. That brings us to the second disappearance. It remains one of the best-known cases connected with Glastenbury Mountain. On December 1, 1946, Paula Welden left the campus of Bennington College for what appeared to be an ordinary afternoon hike. She was 18 years old, a sophomore. She told no one exactly where she was going because she expected to return the same day. Several witnesses later confirmed seeing her on the long trail near Glastenbury Mountain. Among them was an older couple hiking behind her. They described keeping her in sight for much of the walk. She wore a bright red parka. Against the late autumn forest, she was easy to see. Then the trail curved around a rocky outcropping. The couple rounded the bend less than a minute later. The trail ahead stretched clearly before them. Paula was gone. She was not standing on the trail. She was not visible among the trees. She was not waiting at the next bend. She had simply disappeared. The search that followed became one of the largest in Vermont's history. Local authorities received assistance from the FBI. Despite the scale of the operation, no trace of Paula Welden was ever found. Not her backpack. Not her clothing. Not even the bright red parka witnesses had described so clearly. The case remains officially unsolved. At first glance, it is tempting to assume she simply wandered off the trail. That certainly happens in wilderness areas. But Paula's disappearance continues attracting attention because of the timing. Witnesses watched her enter the bend. Less than a minute later, they followed. The section of trail ahead offered no obvious place where someone could leave without being seen. Investigators never established exactly what happened during those few moments. That unanswered question remains at the center of the case. 3 years later, another disappearance added a new layer to the mystery. On December 1st, 1949, exactly 3 years after Paula vanished, James Tetford disappeared while traveling by bus. Tetford was 68 years old, a military veteran returning to Bennington after visiting relatives in St. Albans. Witnesses confirmed seeing him on the bus after its final scheduled stop before Bennington. He was seated normally. His luggage rested in the overhead rack. Nothing appeared unusual. When the bus arrived in Bennington, James Tetford was gone. His suitcase remained overhead. An open timetable still lay across his seat. Other passengers had not seen him leave. The driver had not seen him leave. No official records indicate that the bus made an unscheduled stop before reaching the terminal. Tetford was never found. Conventional explanations suggest he may have exited the bus somewhere along the route. That is certainly possible. But doing so raises additional questions. Why leave behind his luggage? Why leave behind his timetable? Why did no passenger remember seeing him get off? And if he did leave the bus, what happened afterward? Investigators were unable to answer those questions. Like the earlier disappearances, the case eventually reached the same conclusion. No explanation. No resolution. That brings us to the fourth disappearance. It happened less than a year later. On October 12, 1950, Paul Jeffson disappeared near the long trail while accompanying his mother to work. Paul was 8 years old. His mother worked at a local dump near Glastenbury Mountain. She brought Paul with her that morning. At one point, she stepped away briefly to feed pigs at a nearby pen. The distance was short. The time was short. When she returned, Paul was gone. The search began immediately. An 8-year-old child had vanished in broad daylight. Search teams arrived quickly. Tracking dogs picked up Paul's scent from the place where he had been playing. They followed it toward the forest at the edge of the property. At the tree line, the scent ended. The dogs did not continue deeper into the woods. Paul Jeffson was never found. That detail has remained one of the most discussed aspects of the case. Search dogs can lose a scent for many reasons. Weather, changing wind conditions, contamination from other people. No single scent loss automatically suggests anything unusual. Even so, investigators never discovered evidence showing where Paul went after reaching the edge of the forest. The trail simply ended. Just 16 days later, the fifth disappearance occurred. On October 28, 1950, Frida Langer was hiking with her cousin near Somerset Reservoir on Glastenbury Mountain. Langer was 53 years old, an experienced hiker familiar with the area. During the hike, she slipped into a stream and became wet. She told her cousin she would return to camp, change into dry clothes, and come back. She never returned. Her cousin reported her missing almost immediately. The search that followed became the most extensive operation connected with any of the Bennington disappearances. Experienced teams repeatedly searched the area between the stream crossing and the campsite. They found nothing. 7 months later, on May 12, 1951, Frida Langer's body was discovered. The location surprised investigators. It lay in an area that search teams had examined multiple times during the original search. According to the available records, it was along one of the most logical routes between the stream and the campsite. After 7 months of exposure to Vermont's weather, the remains had deteriorated to the point that investigators could not determine a cause of death. Langer remains the only one of the 5 victims whose body was ever recovered. Now, step back and look at the cases together. 5 disappearances. 1 small geographic corridor. 5 years. The first thing to understand is the setting. The Glastenbury region was not a heavily visited wilderness during the 1940s. It was remote, difficult to reach. The number of visitors was relatively small. The second thing is the geography. 4 of the 5 disappearances occurred within roughly the same section of the long trail and the surrounding slopes of Glastenbury Mountain. James Tetford remains the geographic outlier because he disappeared while traveling by bus. Even so, his disappearance occurred within the same regional area and during the same 5-year period. Perhaps the most remarkable detail is what did not happen. No law enforcement agency formally combined these investigations. Each disappearance remained its own case. Each file remained separate. No official investigation treated the 5 disappearances as a connected pattern. Whether that decision was appropriate or not remains open to debate. But the cases were never investigated as a single series. Of course, there are conventional explanations for the Bennington cluster. Most historians and investigators argue that the pattern is largely the result of geography, difficult terrain, and hindsight. Remote wilderness produces disappearances. Searches sometimes fail. The phrase Bennington Triangle was coined decades after the final disappearance by a writer, not by law enforcement. Viewed individually, each case has a possible explanation. That perspective deserves to be taken seriously. But several details continue resisting simple answers. Paula Welden disappeared from a maintained trail while remaining within sight of other hikers only moments earlier. James Tetford vanished from a public bus, despite witnesses confirming he was still aboard shortly before it reached Bennington. Paul Jeffson's scent trail ended at the tree line without investigators determining where it continued. Frida Langer's remains were eventually found in an area that had already been searched repeatedly during the original operation. The conventional explanation accounts for the broad statistics. It does not fully explain every individual detail. Researcher David Paulides later included the Bennington disappearances in his broader Missing 411 * research. Several characteristics overlap with patterns he identified elsewhere. The abrupt scent loss in Paul Jeffson's case. The recovery of a body in an area previously searched in Frida Langer's case. The absence of any trace of Paula Welden, despite an extensive search. And the unusual circumstances surrounding James Tetford's disappearance. Paulides also noted that many of the cases in his collection occur near steep terrain, bodies of water, elevation changes, and boulder fields. The Glastenbury region contains each of those features. Another similarity involves historical land use. Long before the disappearances, Historical records indicate that the Abenaki regarded the mountain as a place to avoid. That reputation existed centuries before anyone described a Bennington triangle. We are not suggesting that these similarities prove a common cause. We are simply noting that the Bennington cases share several characteristics with patterns documented elsewhere. Ultimately, 5 people disappeared from the same small region between 1945 and 1950. The youngest was 8 years old. The oldest was 74. A hunting guide. A college student. A military veteran. A child. An experienced hiker. None of them knew one another. The only thing they unquestionably shared was the mountain. One of the 5 was eventually found. Her cause of death could not be determined. The other 4 were never located. No official investigation formally combined the cases. The name linking them together appeared decades later after someone noticed a geographic pattern that had never been publicly examined as a whole. Whether that pattern represents coincidence, an artifact of history, or something investigators simply never had the information to recognize, remains unresolved. The files still exist. They are still separate. And the central question remains exactly where it was more than 70 years ago. Why did so many people disappear from the same place within such a short period of time? If you have not seen our investigation into Missing 411, it is linked on screen now. Many of the recurring patterns discussed there appear again in the Bennington cases. We think you will recognize the similarities immediately. We publish new investigations every week. If you enjoy exploring questions where history, documented evidence, and unresolved mysteries intersect, consider subscribing. 5 people. 1 mile. 5 years. The investigation did not end when the cases were closed. In many ways, that is where it truly began.